I'd like to say to all of the young innovators,
Black Lives Matter.
Could nonviolent action be used against ISIS?
You can be a part of the biggest scientific discoveries of our time.
So let's talk about sex. We've got 12 minutes, just enough time for a quickie. Sex has never been more accessible to us. I mean, how awesome is that? Historically, you could hope to have sex maybe once or twice a week, but all of a sudden with the 21st century and the internet, we can have sexual experiences 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Awesome, right? Well, yeah, not so much. And that's why you have a middle-aged married mom coming to talk to you about sex, because I want everybody in the room to stand up. Stand on up, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to stretch it out. Okay, now I want you all to continue standing, and I want this third of the room to sit down. This third of the room is digitally castrated. Oh, scary. You can all sit down now. Because I am a children's rights scholar, and the last few years I've been focused on child pornography and child sex trafficking, and what I found a couple of years ago is that more and more people started to come up to me after my talks about child pornography and say, well, what about the sexual exploitation of our boys? And I said, what do you mean? And they started to tell me stories about their sons or their partners who are experiencing a form of digital castration. And I had no idea this was going on, but I did know that our children have a right not to be sexually exploited. So I started to do research, and I discovered that today's pornography industry is a $100 billion industry, and that most of our boys are exposed to it at the average age of 12. Around 11 to 13 is when they start to see these images. And then I started to hear the stories of the first generation of boys who have grown up in this internet age and have come of age sexually. And I discovered that 1/3 of our young men, 18 to 25, are having problems being aroused by their partner. And I started to worry about what that meant for those of us who were lucky enough to grow up in a time where our sexuality wasn't being defined by pixelated images on a computer. Because basically what we have are boys who are trying to form their sexual template as adolescents, who all of a sudden, instead of having their sexual arousal defined by their interactions with peers, male or female, because I don't care what your orientation is, but it used to be talking, attraction, touch that helped them to develop their sexuality along with that most powerful of sexual organs, our mind. And I started to worry because when I grew up, I know that it was kind of slow, you take it easy, and it might be 10 years between that first kiss as a sexual being and your full intimacy with another person. And I started to hear these stories and read about them on the internet about boys who not only were experiencing this sexual castration such that they no longer were able to become, or they never actually were able to be sexually aroused by touching a girl or a boy at their age, but rather the only way that they could become aroused was through exposure to pixelated images. And so what I started to think about was, oh my God, this isn't just the period in which their sexuality is developing, this is the period in which their mind is developing as well, and their peer relationships are developing as well. So I started to look at the research and see how this overexposure to pornography was impacting their development, not just sexually, but mentally, and also psychologically. And what I found is that many of these boys who become addicted to internet pornography, that they also experience social isolation right at that period of their life when they're supposed to be developing relationships with peers, that they experience depression and anxiety. And we know that all of these mental illnesses can impact your success in life, not just as a lover or a partner or a mate or a boyfriend, but as a student and as a professional and as a fulfilled, fully realized human being. In addition to that, I started to look at the brain research, because what we know today is that the brain is not fully developed at 7, despite what we thought 40 years ago. It actually is continuing to develop during your teens and your 20s. And all of a sudden, I discovered that boys' brains, when they're exposed to a lot of pornography, as men, because these studies have been done on men once they are grown, but as men, they have underdeveloped connections to their prefrontal cortex. Oh my goodness, that prefrontal cortex, that's our intellectual maturity. That's where our rational thought is. That's where our reason is. That's the control tower of our brain. That's where we say, don't land, you're gonna crash. And their control towers aren't fully functioning. They also have underdeveloped rewards systems in their brain, so that all of a sudden, you know, when if you know an alcoholic, they can start out getting satisfied with 2 drinks, and then all of a sudden it's 5 drinks, and then it's 10 drinks in order to get them drunk. Well, it's very similar with these boys who are addicted to sex. They have underdeveloped reward systems in their brains, and they need more and more and more of it. But then there's another side of this, which is that with this type of addiction, compared to an addiction to drugs, for example, or alcohol, they seem to need more novelty. So all of a sudden, I started to see this connection potentially between the significant increase that we're witnessing in child pornography, along with the significant increase in adult pornography, and started to realize that, hey, this could be leading to the need for people who historically have not had a sexual desire for children, to need extreme forms of pornography, such as child sex abuse images, as well as I started to think about the fact that the violence that we're seeing today in our pornography, and depending on the study, it's anywhere from 80 to 90% of pornography today shows violence, and most of that violence is against women. The degradation of women, the rape of women. And you start to think, okay, all of these rapes and sexual assaults that we're hearing about on college campuses, is this being fed by the immersion of our boys in this pornographic world as they're coming of age? So I started to look at some of the research about college males and their exposure to pornography. And what I found is that there is a correlation between a boy or young man's overexposure to pornography and the likelihood that he will commit a sexual assault or a rape. And I started to worry, because in addition to that, it doesn't just impact the assaulter, but it also impacts peers, so that people who are overexposed to pornography are less likely to intervene when they see a sexual assault unfolding. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be sending our daughters into the world, into these environments, and all of a sudden we are raising an entire generation of boys who are being overexposed to sexualized images on the internet, and it's impacting the way that they're acting out in their relationships with women. But it's not just the boys who are impacted. We also know that women watch pornography, and that women who watch a lot of pornography, they too are less likely to intervene if they see a sexual assault unfolding. And on top of it, they're less likely to report it if they themselves are sexually assaulted, and they're more likely to tolerate it. So I think, okay, great. If you look at the study that came out a couple of years ago looking at sexual assaults on campus, you saw that many, many women who are sexually abused at college never reported to anyone. And I'm thinking, is there this connection? I mean, here we are, we're supposed to be raising our children during adolescence, late adolescence, early adulthood, to be moving away from their parents and to becoming more independent. And yet at the same time that we're supposed to be moving in that direction, we're allowing a $100 billion industry to teach them not to speak up, not to intervene, not to recognize inappropriate behavior, assaultive behavior, abusive behavior. And so we are undermining their ability to self-regulate and to serve as protectors for one another. And that really worried me. But on top of that, there's another aspect to this, and that is young males, older men, who are overexposed to pornography, that they also are more likely to have regressive attitudes towards women. And it wasn't just limited to their views of women as sexual objects. It was also their attitudes towards the woman's role in society, whether or not she should be working outside the home, whether or not her sexuality should primarily define her. It's a form of hostile sexism where they see us as a threat. They don't see us as equals. And I thought, okay, great. Here we have this democratic society where we are building our society. We have built our society, and we're trying to advance our democratic society on a presumption of equality. And at the same time, we have this $100 billion industry that's saying that half our population doesn't belong to stand shoulder to shoulder with men in the workforce or in the classroom, in our economy, and that's a problem. But then most importantly, I worry about their lifelong relationships and their families, because we know that societies all around the world have recognized partnerships and families as a building block of society. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to be married. It doesn't mean that our relationships have to have lifelong aspects to them. But what it does mean is that building block of relationships, that ability to touch, that ability to communicate, to open up ourselves to one another, to give another person pleasure, we're not teaching our children this through so much of the media that they're witnessing, particularly in the form of pornography. So what do? One, let's do what we're doing right now. Let's talk about sex. We need to talk to our kids about sex. We need to talk to them about what healthy sex is. We need to talk about it in a direct, matter-of-fact way. And we have to give them the building blocks that they need in order to understand what is healthy, mutual sex of equal pleasure, equal exchange of experience, consent, and we need to make sure that they are comfortable in recognizing what are abusive or inappropriate sexual experiences. We also need to talk to our kids about porn, because you know what? Pornography, I used to say it's 3 clicks away. I tried this a couple of weeks ago. 1 click away. So we need to talk to them about porn, and we need to talk to them about the dangers of overexposure to pornography. I'm not an anti-porn advocate. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever have it, but what I'm saying is that when our kids are in the most vulnerable state of their sexual development, their brain development, and their psychological development, that we need to take care of them and make sure that they're set up for success. And that's why we need to do a third thing, which is that we love freedom of speech in America. We love it so much that probably the only things we love more are sex, guns, and money. But we need to figure out a way to regulate the internet so that kids don't access pornography, and especially violent pornography, with just 1 click. It's going to be a challenge for us, but I know that we can do it. And we need to make sure that what our children see on the internet are things that empower them as equal, active sexual partners so that they can build lasting relationships, both in their personal lives as well as in their professional lives. Thank you.